Hello, everybody. Um, Lovely to see everyone. I'm sorry that we can't see everyone in a big, friendly Zoom grid, but I'm very pleased to be able to be with you all today. Um, so today we are here for the leadership panel. This is about connecting within and across campuses, fostering collaboration that supports meaningful change, and we're going to be focusing on that active collaboration when trying to make meaningful change in the teaching and learning space. So we've gathered together a panel of experts today who have been through it, who I'm excited to hear from and excited to have a conversation with. Um, Before we begin, I would like to gratefully acknowledge that the UBC Vancouver campus is situated on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And also, we are being joined by faculty and colleagues from UBC Okanagan. And we respectfully acknowledge that the Syilx Okanagan Nation and their peoples, in whose traditional ancestral unceded territory UBC Okanagan is situated. So we are joining from from these two campuses on these two areas of unceded territory. And also, I encourage everyone to think solemnly about the places from which you are joining, especially in our role as educators and our role in decolonization and indigenization as per our core principles of our university. So welcome everyone. It's with great joy that I bring us all together today. My name is Elisa Baniassad. My role is Deputy Academic Director of the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. I'm really privileged to be in this room with these wonderful people. So I'm going to just remind everybody today that these are conversations that may spark feelings. We're going to be monitoring the Q&A, so the question and answer chat. The way that will work is you will be able to ask questions of the speakers, but I will be introducing the speakers in a second. Sorry, guys. And then you can ask questions as the session goes. I will be sort of reading and aggregating questions and asking those questions on your behalf. So I just wanted to set up how that was going to go. And now I just want to introduce our panel. So welcome to everybody. If you could all unmute, that would be fantastic. First, I'd like to ask Laurie to introduce yourself. Laurie, you are the Associate Dean Students and Faculty of Arts at UBC Vancouver. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, you bet. In addition to that role in arts, I'm a professor of teaching in the Department of English Language and Literature here at UBCV. And I'll introduce myself by way of thinking about collaboration because that's really been central to my career, my research, which is kind of unusual in humanities, teaching and educational leadership. And I was thinking about two particular areas that collaboration's been core, and that is in a series of formal leadership roles of increasing complexity that I've been holding in arts since 2012 when I started. That's from running large undergraduate programs like the Coordinated Arts Program to higher level positions like Associate Head of English and Director of First Year Programs and Acting Director of the School of Journalism, Writing, and Media. In all of those programs or units, those leadership roles intersected with times of significant change, growth, transformation, new governance structures. I've also had experience collaborating and leading research teams with large TLEFs, in particular the Cheating Hearts TLEF on academic integrity that introduced new educational approaches and expectations in writing courses in arts first year programs. In all those roles, taking a collaborative approach influenced by Kathy Davidson's collaboration by difference principle, which recognizes we can do more together than we can by ourselves, and focusing on shared outcomes rather than singular approaches has really been helpful to me in my experiences of navigating difficult, challenging periods, building teams rather than groups, and getting where we wanted to go. Just a little bit
Mm,
about me.
that's amazing. Teams versus groups. I love that. Um, uh, Thank you so much and welcome. Thanks for joining us. Next, Jackie Denison from UBC Okanagan. Can can you tell us about yourself? I'm going to remind you that you are the Associate Provost of Teaching and Learning at UBC Okanagan. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Elisa. And sometimes I need reminding as well. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of the panel. Before I introduce myself, I do also want to acknowledge that I'm joining from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation, where the Okanagan campus is situated. And it's a beautiful day in the Okanagan. So Alyssa asked us to share the lens we're bringing today, and I would say, broadly speaking, I bring an academic lens, which is where I'll begin with sharing my UBC leadership involvement at the faculty level, because that really was the starting point. So my faculty experience is where I've had several opportunities for academic leadership, which I think is what has led me to this appointment as the Associate Provost Teaching and Learning for the Okanagan campus. I'm an associate professor of teaching in the School of Nursing within the Faculty of Health and Social Development. And being a nurse is an important part of my identity as an educator. It's really where my passion for education began. I will say at UBC Vancouver, what feels like 100 years ago. Similar to Laurie, I've had a variety of leadership roles. So for kind of from 2018 to 2024, I held a number of leadership roles in the School of Nursing, including the director for about 2.5 years. And being a younger campus, I've had the opportunity to be involved in the growth of the campus and the schools and programs. So I've had many opportunities to develop and redesign curriculum in both the credit and non-credit spheres, which has been a tremendous opportunities and also a heck of a lot of work. I would say developing excellent programs requires teamwork, and many of the programs I've been involved with have been remarkable examples of strong teamwork. As we've mentioned, since January 2025, I've been the Associate Provost Teaching and Learning on the Okanagan campus, working very collaboratively with Simon. In this role, I work with several teams that have connections to teaching and learning, and that includes teams in the Okanagan, but many cross-campus teams as well. And I would say that my focus is really on supporting and leading initiatives and projects that are rooted in teaching and learning excellence. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Alyssa.
Well, thanks, Jackie. Fantastic. So that I don't confuse people, I'm not going to go straight to Jackie Stewart, who I will not call other Jackie for the rest of this panel.
You can.
Moving over,
I don't mind.
I may. Next up, Simon Bates, Vice Provost and Associate Vice President, Teaching and Learning. That's a mouthful at UBC Vancouver. Do you want us to tell us about yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Elisa. Good afternoon, everyone. Elisa, you're keeping us on our toes. I notice you are going in a completely different order than on
Indeed.
the slide being shown. So always good to keep your panelists on their toes. So as Elisa said, Simon Bates, Vice Provost and Associate Vice President of Teaching and Learning for UBC Vancouver. I feel like I've been in leadership roles for the entire time I've been at UBC. I arrived in 2012 as academic director of the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology. At that time, I also held the title of Senior Advisor for Teaching and Learning, which was my first sort of foray of working with the university leadership and executive, the deans, the provost, on all matters related to teaching and learning. So across that role, and then associate provost and now vice provost, I've always had a position which had a sense of university-wide or campus-wide responsibility. And I would say those type of roles absolutely necessitate collaboration. You cannot undertake that work without collaborating with academic units, with other central administrative units, and also, and maybe this is a different take on collaboration. I wanted to stress collaboration with students and student leadership. Student senators has been a thread that's been woven through my time as an academic leader at UBC. I'm also professor of teaching in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. I was one of the first cohort of professors of teaching back in 2012. And so I've also felt a responsibility and a collaboration with other people in the educational leadership stream, and also faculty in education-focused roles as well, the educational leadership stream and lecturers as well. I've had the privilege of working across many, many different projects across the Vancouver campus over more than a decade, and indeed across both campuses, as Jackie has alluded to, on a whole host of teaching and learning projects, some of which I am sure we will talk about in the next 45 minutes or so. But I'll leave it at that for now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, wow. It really is true that you've been working in this space for a really long time, and that collaboration is absolutely vital. Last but not least, Jackie Stewart, who is the Associate Dean Academic for the Faculty of Science. Take it away, Jackie. Other Jackie, not other Jackie.
Thanks, Elisa. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here to talk about this important topic today. I'll just give a brief history of some of my roles at UBC. So I've been teaching on the Vancouver campus for over 2 decades now, and one leadership role that sort of coincided with the start of my educational leadership faculty position in chemistry was as the department director for the Carl Lyman Science Education Initiative. So that was focused within chemistry, but also I had the opportunity to work with people in other science departments, and we sometimes did different studies or interventions in different departments to see how they compared and what we could learn about learning from those. I was the director of our first year seminar in science for a couple years, and that is an interesting position in that the teaching team from that course it's pulled from different departments, and we try really to have a high degree of coherence and similarity in how we teach. And so that was an interesting role. My first kind of university-wide leadership appointment was as the CTLT Deputy Academic Director, which I worked in.
Wait, that's my job.
I know, which I worked in from 2019 to 2021. And I was thinking of that when I was trying to think of examples of kind of working across the 2 campuses. And so one task that I think you, Simon, asked me to work on was thinking about shaping an academic integrity working group. That group was working under the purview of the Senate Teaching and Learning Committee, and we really tried to facilitate conversations and think about activities and resources that our community could benefit from, and really building actually off of Laurie McNeill's work and trying to take a more educative approach to academic integrity. And so one of our dual campus projects was the first version of the academic integrity website that UBC has. So I learned a lot from that experience. And in my role now, so in the academic portfolio, I work on curriculum. And so that requires collaboration for sure across faculties. We also have some science programs that are really jointly run between faculties. So cognitive systems is one example of that, and neuroscience and some others where really multiple faculties shape the curriculum in the process of running that program. And I also have a kind of a side project where I work outside of our UBC campuses, and I lead a multi-institution research consortium where we're examining equity in post-secondary science. And so what I have really gained from that experience is, since all of my career has been at UBC, it's really interesting to see how things work at other places, and some things seem fixed, and that has to be this way, but really other institutions do things differently. And yeah, so I'll stop there. Elisa, back to you.
Amazing. Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of my first forays into big whole university collaborations was also in the deputy role, which I took from you. Well, you gave it to me. I don't know. Edit this part out. This isn't being live streamed, right? So now we're going to go to sort of a discussion. Everybody's welcome to unmute and chime in, but I will be calling on certain people to have first voice in these questions. So roughly speaking, the journey that we're going to take today is we're going to talk about challenges, then we're going to talk about how to make progress um, balancing consultation against the need for speed. Then we're going to talk about how to build relationships, which is really at the core of collaboration. And then finally, we're going to finish on looking at the challenges of harmonizing viewpoints, especially in a university that is as large as this one. So Laurie, I'm going to start with you. Can you just tell us something about a challenge or an experience with challenges that you've faced while doing this collaborative work around teaching and learning leadership? What has been something that you've had to face and that you had to struggle with? And how did you overcome it?
Hmm. Um, well, there are myriad examples, but I think I'll start with the idea that collaborative leadership doesn't necessarily look like what we've been trained to understand and respect as effective or real leadership, and that is a particular challenge in the context of leadership in academic culture, which has its own ingrained hierarchies, rank, status, and often involves faculty members who are often resistant to being led at all, particularly in ways that maybe they haven't recognized. So for me, when I started in leadership, I was younger, female, pre-tenure assistant professor of teaching. So there are a number of marks there, even though, of course, I still enjoyed significant privilege through other means. And I was leading groups through, as I said, significant changes. So there were a lot of power dynamics and perceptions and unwritten norms that made collaborative leadership even more difficult, but also for which I think it was particularly effective at addressing ultimately. So with that group, these groups, there were historical tensions and a lack of trust in each other, like let alone before they even thought about me as leading them through these rocky times. So the idea of getting people together in a dialogic process of engagement and problem solving, which is what I wanted us to do, led by this totally junior person, I think that didn't initially have terrific buy-in, but ultimately, that this is what collaboration is like the secret sauce on, because it does allow us to get in the same room, actually hear each other, be heard, work through some principles of engagement that respect difference, that respect difference and allow difference to stay in place while we do things together. I think that I'll just, speaking broadly, that did help us ultimately get that buy-in and allow us to do so much more once they didn't think that collaboration or that kind of process was just going to be, let's say, dippy in the kindest way, coming from this person.
Right. So almost like a toothlessness of collaboration, like you're going to all meet, but in a sort of vacuous way and achieve nothing was the expectation. But what I'm hearing you say is that you were able to find real richness in that collaboration and actually make progress because of it.
Yeah. And certainly just a recognition looking back that a collaborative process has a number of barriers against it that have to be, like, we have to negotiate these things in our lived experience, in the bodies and identities we bring to work, but in the particular context of academia, which is both really interested in unpacking those norms, but also deeply entrenched in its thinking, there's additional challenges that a particularly young person or a person from equity deserving groups has to navigate additionally.
Right, to overcome those entrenched beliefs about who can lead and what the voice of leadership should sound like.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else have an experience to share? Simon, go ahead.
Well, I was reflecting on what Laurie was saying about coming into a role or leading a collaboration when you don't have the prior context or history or experience. And I was thinking about it from my perspective. I came into the university from the outside into a leadership role, and colleagues on the panel were also talking about how they came into their roles within CTLT or the dean's office. There's organizational history and dynamics, and things you just don't know. And one of the hardest things is, as you come into those roles, there's a sense of expectation of what you are going to achieve or what you might be tasked with leading. Particularly, I think if you come in at a time of change and there's a desire for, some new thinking on a problem, or solve a persistent issue that the faculty or the unit has been grappling with, or lead a new initiative. The real challenge is you don't know what you don't know when you come into those activities, and it's quite you're feeling that sense of, I don't know, and I need to understand the context, and yet there's this expectation on, well, when are you going to have it all figured out? When are you going to be able to give us clear direction on what we might be doing, whether that's a group of faculty working on a curriculum project or a unit like CTLT. It's an interesting tension to I think.
That's right. And people's expectations also about how you will be solving the problem or leading, it doesn't really align that well with an onboarding process for a leader, right? You might have a very different approach than people are expecting. Any thoughts from the Jackies on this one? Jackie Denison, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just build on what the other panelists have said. And I think working in post-secondary education is a complex world, right? There's a lot of procedures, there's a lot of policy, there's a lot of things that can get in the way. And so sometimes that feeling of, if I just work by myself, I'll get this done faster because the system is already full of a lot of steps and policies and procedures that make getting change through difficult. But what I've experienced is when you put that effort into building that collaborative team, in the long run, it actually pays off remarkably in terms of outputs and opportunities for others to get involved and build other leaders within the team. So I think sometimes it's easy, we all have our own priorities, they don't always align, but when you step back to really think about what's the objective and what are we trying to do, that collaboration is actually pivotal.
Jackie Stewart, do you want to chime in on this one?
I want to be the only one not to say anything because it might suggest that I have experienced no challenges.
Not everybody has to speak about all the things.
Well, it's true, but there's always
I would love
challenges.
to hear your perspective on this one.
There's so much. Yeah, I think any kind of meaningful change at our institution, requires a lot of different groups, right? So beyond just faculty, staff, students working together, but just different organizational groups too. And I think definitely coming into these roles, I only knew my little faculty world, right? And all of it is new and different. So there's just so much to learn to work effectively with people. And I think it takes time. You can't really, there's no book. You can't just be like, okay, this is what that person is responsible for. So, and that's kind of uncertain, right? Because often if it's my class or a research project, I get to direct everything and I can learn things as fast as I want. But I think things just take time. So I'll stop there to be succinct.
No, I think that's really right. It's a very big difference from being a faculty member where in many ways you can orchestrate your reality versus working in a system that exists. And especially, thank you. And especially, I think when trying to get things done. So I think one of the things that I experienced was this feeling of like, well, normally I can just say, this is how things will be, and I will achieve work. Not the case when you're dealing with thousands of staff and thousands of faculty and many tens of thousands of students. So going to Simon for this one, how do you move progress forward when you're needing to balance wide consultation and take a lot of viewpoints into account, but you actually need to make swift progress. Like right now, there's huge times of change. How are you managing this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we're probably going to have different perspectives depending on our own sort of understanding of ourselves as leaders and personalities. So I'll give you sort of my take on it, and you could almost make this link back to the previous question. Challenge working collaboratively. One of the challenges that I think we'd all recognize at UBC is scale and complexity, right? It's not just the number of conversations that you might need to have, but it's how entangled they become. It's often not a clear path from ideation to completion of something. I've come to realize about myself that I'm particularly action oriented. I like to get on with things. I will People are smirking at me on the panel when I say that. Strategize,
What? That's not
arrange,
true.
do. So from my perspective, I need sometimes to put the brakes on a little bit on my own thinking and pay attention to that consultation. Think about who's not in the conversation thus far. What other perspectives might there be? Who else do I need to talk to? What have I missed? And so that's what I focus on, because my natural inclination is identify the problem, propose a solution, think about how to implement it. That's my bias, if you like, towards action. So the consultation process obviously is tremendously important. In a place like UBC, it rarely gets to full consensus, right? Because of the multiplicity of perspectives and priorities. And I think if I think about the leaders at UBC and elsewhere that I feel I've really learned from or admired, one thing that sets them apart is the kind of courage to make that decision when you don't have consensus, which is frequent. Knowing that that decision is going to make people unhappy or make people think, well, you didn't listen to my perspective. And to do that in a way that it's not personal, it's not about the individual or the department, it's the issue. And sometimes there is no right answer to a particular challenge. So you're left feeling not just what is the right course of action, but often what is the least bad option, if you like, or the best option from a set of imperfect choices. So that's my perspective based on what I've come to understand of myself as a leader.
Yeah, so sort of leading definitely in consultation and taking almost an advisory feeling from the people that you're serving, but then also having the courage to make progress, knowing that there will be compromises based on based on your priorities or the priorities of the university or the priorities that you're hearing from the population. Others have thoughts on this. Laurie, you've unmuted. Do you want to jump in?
Oh, I actually never muted, but
Well,
I
now
was
you're
I was
being called
born
on.
ready, apparently. I think that is a bit of a misperception about collaborative approaches, is that it's endlessly consultative. I mean,
Mm,
ultimately, you are the leader and you have to make a choice. So, Simon's point that there's never going to be a right answer, there's never going to be consensus, is it, and thinking about like a time sensitive, complicated manner. You as leader are inviting input, which will shape your decisions, and ultimately you're going to make a decision. And you have to own the decision too. Like maybe you didn't hear correctly or whatever.
mhm,
And as possible, you might be able to adjust if you've gotten it wrong. Um, but ultimately, yeah, there's input, and you as leader are left to make that final call. Sometimes, like, think about Simon et al. In March 2020. There was a little bit of time for some consultation, but like we had to move really quickly. And I think that that's another negotiation you always have to make. And now I will mute.
Jackie, Stewart, go for it.
I think the previous two answers were on point for the urgent progress. And I'm very sort of lucky in my role that, you know, there's maybe no curriculum emergencies that have to be decided by Friday. Sometimes there is. And so where my brain went to in this kind of balance for consultation and collaboration to urgent progress is just some examples where actually the consultation to shape the path forward made things faster in the end, because that process really either made the idea in the end better, or people, you know, felt like they had the right input. So it's always a balance, but I definitely agree with what Laurie said about not necessarily endlessly round and round and round. So if everybody has, you know, their little piece included in whatever the final product is that you're working on, but maybe it can be faster. It's my optimistic take.
Yeah, but it also sounds like all of you also had a thread of deeply caring about the people whose voices you were hearing, and not dismissing any of the concerns, but recognizing and staying in that tension of having to compromise and knowing that, yeah, you weren't able to meet everybody's needs. And that doesn't mean the needs were not valid. It just means that you weren't able to do it. And sort of being able to hold that uncomfortable position is kind of what I'm hearing you guys say is kind of the leadership job, is just being able to sit in that. And that is really about relationships, which takes us to our next question. And Jackie, Denison, I'm going to come to you for this one. So especially working across campuses as your vantage point from UBC Okanagan, relationships, as you've said, are so vitally important. How do you build those? How do you set those up? Because it's a really big university. How do you meet people?
Thanks, Elisa. And I think this question also builds on the previous questions. It's really a great question because I think it's easy to get sort of bogged down with the complexities of cross-campus work, right? But what I know is that when we are able to move past the complexities and the challenges, we really do achieve great results. I would say, and I hope other people would agree, that my leadership approach is really relational and human-centered. I think when you're working cross campus, those relationships are critical and they have to have trust. In my experience, trust is gained through things like showing up. I think that's very important. Delivering on the things you say you're going to do, being transparent, and then ultimately holding each other accountable to UBC's core commitments to excellence in teaching, really. I think momentum is achieved when we start to see the results of the work we've been doing. I've seen firsthand how powerful the outputs of cross-campus collaboration are in teaching and learning spaces, for example, across the CTLT and the CTL, on the many events that are our cross-campus initiatives, also through a number of the projects through the Alt 2040 teaching and learning grants, and then of course, right now in many and all things AI. I'll just give a recent example. There was a call for a cross-campus course design team, and I was just thrilled to see the excitement in the UBC faculty in joining that team. We had a record number of people put their name in the hat, and they really wanted to be a part of that collaborative experience. So there's so many others, but I think this is a great one for other people to chime in on too. So I'll leave it to the other panelists to share their experiences.
I think I've seen all of you build relationships really, really skillfully. And Jackie, you too, and you're somewhat new in your role. So this is probably something where you've been kind of speed running the relationship building very, very skillfully from where I'm sitting. Others, do you want to comment on how to build those connections that are so important to keeping things moving? Simon, you're perpetually unmuted, so maybe I'll ask you, do you have thoughts on this?
Yes, there's a reason why I'm perpetually unmuted, because I don't want to be that person who starts talking for the rest of the panel to say you're muted, which seems to happen on almost daily basis on Zoom. So
Clever.
yeah, I think listening to Jackie, and obviously, with her being in her role since January, that is an area across the two campuses, the teaching and learning leadership within the Provost's office, where I think we've both really paid a lot of care and attention to develop and nurture that relationship. Jackie, I'm looking forward to us actually meeting in person in the next couple of months, because that hasn't happened yet. One of the things I've come to learn about working across both campuses on a variety of different projects is you have to recognize the campuses are similar but distinct, right? And there's a particular identity, history, context, culture for each of the campuses. And I often think as an institution, we tie ourselves in knots sometimes about how we should work across campuses. It's really not that difficult. I'm not saying there's not some structural challenges or the way we organize ourselves that make it harder than some people might like. But at the end of the day, you achieve momentum by paying attention to those relationships, by respecting and recognizing context and difference, and trusting in that your partners on the other campus are striving for the same goals, which is what's good for one campus or both campuses is good for the institution as a whole. I think one of the things that often gets overlooked is everybody's role is, certainly everybody on this screen, everyone's role is full and busy, but to build those relationships and momentum, it does take time, and you have to be prepared to not make that time, but take that time in order to do it. It may feel unproductive when you have a long to-do list, but it's actually laying really strong foundations for not just what you're working on currently, but for the future as well.
I would just add in that I don't think my transition into this role and the work that we do across our campuses would be at all successful or feasible without the relationships across the campus. So yeah, I really want to hone in on what Simon said. The campus, one UBC, there are distinct differences at each campus. And so when we come together, it's really how can we support and help one another to achieve what we know we need to achieve?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think also putting, doing that work that you've referred to of really putting names to roles, putting people into roles instead of feeling like you're emailing putting a ticket in or having emailing just a generic email list. Instead, knowing that you're asking a person for help and building a relationship with that person, because actually UBC is kind of small in some ways. It's a very small town of people who are helping keep things moving, and it helps a lot to know all of the people in the town, and that's part of the work. It's not time off the side of your desk. That's what's on the desk, right? It helps keep everything on the desk moving forward. But Jackie, Stewart, I'm going to come to you next because, we've touched on working through difficult challenges and bringing voices together and moving forward with courage, even when we know we have to compromise. But sometimes it's really big differences. You and I are in science, and I know that within the Faculty of Science, there are differences of opinions about how things should be done. And you're sitting at this fulcrum of having to harmonize these viewpoints. How do you do this? Do you have advice for us?
Well, the example I was going to talk about, a new one popped into my head when you were phrasing it that way, but I'll come back to the new idea. I think the way you phrase the question, does hit at something that's already come up in the panel, which was as long as people are on the same page with the goal, then perhaps the way it unfolds and the process and structure of it might be different in the different contexts. So the example that came to mind when I was thinking about this question was during the time where I was working on the academic integrity working group and working with lovely colleagues at UBCO for the first time, really, other than occasionally seeing my chemistry colleagues and having a drink at a conference, but actually working on work. I think I had very idealistic views of what that work would look like throughout our working group and the types of things we'd be able to do. But I think during that process, I learned that the goal can be the same, the way it unfolds might be different. And so there's lots of reasons for that. So one are the things that others have mentioned, like the different culture or context or process. The other is just that probably the two campuses are at slightly different time points on a topic. So there were definitely things that our UBCO colleagues had already done. And so if we're thinking of, say, new events, of course, they want to keep building on the excellence of their current offerings rather than like come up with something new with us, because why would you want to do that? So those lessons really did help me kind of internalize that things can look very different, but still be working toward the same goal. So I'm not answering what happens if you have different goals, but hopefully then there's some kind of higher level strategy or other things you can point to at least be on that page. I think that's very important. And then what popped into my head, Elisa, when you were kind of introducing this topic, and thinking of examples within science, for example, when we have people with different opinions. And so one process I work on is our second year specialization admission. And there's lots of ways one could do that. And I really want to, improve the process every year and try to get more of our students into their top choice specialization. And I work closely with the departments on how all that's going to work. And there's really different opinions about the right way to do things like that. Randomize everything, or grades are perfect and we need to really make sure we use that only, and everything in between. And I think what's helpful is really just coming back to kind of those really key student priorities. So what are the indicators? We want more students to get their first choice. We want to have an equitable process, whatever it might be. Maybe that helps people also get on the same page with the goal, but I'm not saying I'm excellent at that. It's definitely daily work on trying to do that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that is excellent. Maybe that's what excellence looks like, is just staying committed to the daily work of it. Because it does sound, it's not kind. I think it's true. It's that it is really vital to remain connected grounded in both the individuals who have the needs, but also connected with the higher level vision. Laurie, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about Jackie S. as touching on the idea of instead of sharing the solution, or beginning with what's the problem we want to solve, because that you can get commonality on, and then you might have different pathways to get there, and maybe those pathways can remain discrete. I don't know, Jackie, in what you were in your example of second year, if you can in fact have differences across departments, or it has to be matchy-matchy. But like that's a winning way to go forward, is to say we're all going to get to here, and you might do it a little bit differently, and that's fine. That can be a way of having both, both difference and similarity, which can help us negotiate. And I think Jackie D also articulated the key persuasive elements are the values of collaborative leadership. I mean, not that they're all the same, but I think probably everyone on this call has already ticked off the boxes of talking about transparency, communication, accountability, integrity. Those are the, if you are leading with integrity in a collaborative way, you are already set up or trying to practice the shared principles of engagement that allow for comfortable, sometimes uncomfortable, difference and similarity. What's the opposite of difference? To sit together.
Yeah, I think that point about transparency is really valuable as well. I think um, just chiming in with my own experience a bit, it seems like people are more willing to almost accept directional difference from what they would have preferred if they understand really why the decisions were made like that. Um, and it's not that you need to tell people necessarily how the entire sausage is made, but you have to give some rationale and kind of some process transparency. If not, because you can't really give data transparency all the time. Jackie, Denison, go ahead.
You've really got the Jackies down, Alyssa. I'm very proud of
I'm
you.
figuring it all out, you know. Thank
Yeah.
goodness you have name tags in Zoom.
I think one thing that kind of relates to this, although not as direct, that's really important for leadership in academic spaces and in all spaces is also humility. You know, I think we talked about consultation and, you know, ultimately having to make decisions. And I think sometimes also being able to say, maybe we didn't get it quite right, and these are the reasons why. And I think in a leadership with faculty and staff, that goes a long way. And I think in the classroom, even just bringing it right down to the classroom to students, when you can say, you know, I tried this, I took a risk, and it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. And so I think that's also a piece of kind of what we're talking about, is that space for leadership to show that humility too, when, because we don't always get it right. And I know I certainly haven't always gotten it right. Is really critical.
Yeah, that sense of accountability with that courage, knowing that this is the way to build relationships and keep that interpersonal humanity in focus, even though you can say, "Yep, that was not the right move." Absolutely. We have one really great, inspiring question from our audience, and I'm just gonna ask it sort of in a broader way. Um, you know, getting into leadership is something that not everybody wants to do, but for those who do want to do it, um, the relationships are such an important part of leadership that sometimes leadership roles are filled by people who already have the relationships. That can be a particular barrier for equity seeking, equity denied groups, members of groups that are maybe traditionally not as in the in group of the administration. So what do we do about that as an institution? We know we want diversity in leadership. How do we move this forward? How do we make a change, and how do we build out opportunities to make sure there's a pipeline? Simon, you haven't talked in a while, so maybe I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the question. I think fair and transparent recruitment processes. I'm thinking about some leadership roles that are governed by policies that can support that kind of fairness and transparency. I think, in the time I've been at UBC, I've seen that change an awful lot in terms of the 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 rigor and the robustness around identification, mentoring, support for selection of new and emerging leaders. I actually think leadership support in the broadest sense, UBC does a really good job compared to other institutions that I've worked at. Not perfect, and I'm certainly not saying that those kind of issues for equity seeking or equity denied groups don't still persist in some areas. I think they do. One of the things that really surprised me when I first moved into the associate provost role, I think I'd been in the role a few weeks, and the provost at the time, we were having one of our first meetings, and he asked me about succession planning. And I'd literally been in the role for about 3 weeks. And I thought, what a bizarre question at the start of a 5-year term. Um, with some time to reflect on that and think about it, it's actually really, really important. I think part of the job of being a leader and being in a leadership role is to cultivate that pipeline, to support it, to make sure that there are diverse opportunities for surfacing that kind of diversity in background in applicants. And it's something I really, really take seriously as making sure that people are given access to those opportunities. And we are thinking the worst thing that can happen to a particular leadership context is a vacuum, right?
Mhm.
We've seen that with transitions at various levels of the university, makes it really, really challenging. So what we can do to ensure that continuity and that smooth succession, as smooth as it can be, I think is part of what being in a leadership role is about. It's not just what you do, it's what you prepare others to be able to do as they move into those roles.
Jackie, Denison, go ahead.
Yeah, just building on Simon's, I think, well, one thing I'll just point out, yes, we don't have it right, but if you look at the panel, it's delightful to see as many women leaders on the panel as we see here today. I do think it's around intention, though. You know, we talk a lot about UBC around our commitments to equity, diversity, inclusion, reconciliation. And so we know the game of hitting targets. You set the targets, you can, for the most part, achieve those targets, but it's not just putting people from equity deserving groups into those leadership positions and next opportunities. It's also how we support them to succeed in a system that is not designed for many people from equity deserving groups. So I think it's broader than just recruitment and opportunity. It's also how do we nurture and support so that people, when they have those opportunities, are successful.
So mentorship in addition, and sort of that, especially that succession planning that you talked about, Simon, almost like apprenticeships, maybe like, yeah.
And collaboration,
Jackie,
right? Wanting to see others succeed in their opportunities and roles.
Yeah, absolutely. We are almost at time, but there's a really great question in the Q&A that I just wanted to bring us to, because it is really the reason that we're all a university at all, which is students. And this audience member, thank you so much for asking this question, is asking about these leadership principles and how they can translate into student experience, especially around groups. Jackie, do you want to take a first voice at this one?
Right. I think it's a really challenging question. I'm imagining some of my own past students complaining about group work. And it's not very satisfying for students to hear, well, you have to do it in the real world. So you have to do it here. Like, that's not really a good enough reason. And Laurie distinguished kind of teams versus groups earlier, that's a big difference. If you're working on a team, you are actually working toward that goal. So I think anybody who's really committed to teaching their students teamwork scaffolds probably lots of things into that. So explicit instruction about it, feedback to each other, and feedback on what that is, really having that as a learning outcome in your course. So I think that kind of relates to maybe in some areas we need to do a better job helping students work in teams together. I'm trying to think if I'm answering the question though.
I think also maybe, and Laurie, you're also unmuted in case you want to chime in, as someone who's working in a large faculty with a lot of group projects, I bet. It's also maybe about that humility, transparency, communication, not going dark, maintaining the chatter, and keeping those connections open. Laurie, do you want to speak to any of that as well in terms of advice for students?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good but difficult thing to do, which I always made my students do in their team projects, was to have the difficult conversations first before these things are real. So, like, figure out how you're going to work together and how you're going to work together when things don't go well. So Lisa, you just gave the example of, don't go dark, etc. What happens? So how are we going to handle it if I have to give you critical feedback? What is the best
Mm,
way to communicate with you? What is your schedule versus my schedule? I mean, what it comes down to is clear communication, but if you haven't had a practice of communicating at all or learning what questions to ask, I think that's an issue. And in fact, this responds to both the questions we've had about building pipelines, helping others thrive in these roles. This is about the kind of hidden curriculum or of collaboration. Is those are the skills that we need to have that are often untaught, expectations or things that we have learned along the way about. I wish I had asked that. Simon began by saying I didn't, we don't know what we don't know when we come into a new place. The humility of a learner is I don't know what it's like to work with you. So why don't we figure that out together? And it's not a particularly comfortable place because at university we're expecting to be seen as expert in some kind of way, and in fact you really have to park that and be curious. Not that you can't be a
mhm,
curious expert, but again, there's some anxiety around what does curiosity look like as a power move?
mhm.
What is it like to not know and be open to learning? And those are the principles or the spirit that make collaboration effective.
That's wonderful. Laurie, thank you so much. We are close to time. And close enough that unfortunately I think we are going to have to close out here. Simon, Laurie, Jackie, other Jackie, it's been a total pleasure. Thank you all for joining us. I look forward to many more conversations like this with all of you. So thank you everyone and to the audience for your wonderful participation and engagement. Thanks, folks.